At some point, all refugees were asylum seekers, right? And they presented themselves and sought asylum, and then, their cases vetted, and they gained that kind of refugee status. Every campus or refuge works directly with refugee resettlement agencies. So we, as chapters, as ECAR chapters across the US, have hosted refugees and parolees and SIVs. However, University in San Francisco 2 years ago reached out to me and said, hey, we don't actually do refugee resettlement in San Francisco. That's not the population that comes asking for support. It's asylum seekers. And we were like, great, we don't have the resources. And by resources, I mean every campus or refuge over the years has developed a significant amount of resources to make sure that campuses can do this as easily as possible. Like, we literally have a manual, a best practices, a program coordinator handbook. We have trainings, like A to Z, everything that you need. What we don't have is an A to Z of how to host asylum seekers, because we work with resettlement agencies, not with organizations. In this particular case, it's IMH, I am for Human Integrity. It's an organization in San Francisco, IM4H. And we said, that's great. We want to support you as much as possible, but we don't have the resources to, but we'll give you as much as we can in terms of information. So USF hosted 10 asylum seekers on their campus last year. They're going to do the same thing again, and we're collaborating with them to create a manual and a best practices, because when we say to campuses, hey, you should host asylum seekers, we want to be able to say, and here's a manual, and here's a handbook on how you can do that. I really think it's important for us to pivot, to think about the ways in which we can support all vulnerable populations, and every campus or refuge is a call to that. Like, how do you leverage your campus resources to support your community? It has to be a hyper-local effort. It has to understand the community's needs and respond to those needs. So it needs to be flexible and fluid and nimble. So in like your program, you're supporting refugee students, right? And I don't want to forget the question that you told me I need to answer and should answer about curricular and co-curricular engagement. So hopefully that will come up. But I hope that answers your question.
Just to add to that, you mentioned parolees. So I think I remember reading that parolees have a little bit more resources from the
Yes.
Office of Refugee Resettlement with, I think it's HHS, right? So have you found that working with parolees is similar to working with refugees, or is it a completely different process?
It's, well, every campus or refuge really partners with a resettlement agency. We don't separately work with or get assured cases. That the term is assured. So in this particular case, there were Afghan parolees, because the Afghan evacuees who came here had to go through a process and apply for asylum. They weren't refugees. They weren't coming in as refugees. So the parolees that were hosted by several ECAR chapters were Afghan parolees. And yes, they received some services, but they had to go through a legal process that the campuses were, able, especially if they had a law clinic that to support with. But they are ORR eligible population, like if they're, in the definition of ORR eligible populations, parolees are there.
Thank you. I'm really excited to read your book and to have this discussion tonight. I'm wondering if you can reflect on what you think is radical about hospitality and how that connects to your work.
Yeah, I love that question. The term radical hospitality typically refers to this, and in terms of like faith traditions, refers to this idea of embracing or welcoming the stranger, right? But the root of the word radical is root. The actual word is like root, right? And so I like to think of it as a welcome that is rooted, in the sense that when you welcome somebody, it's not just checking a box or, look, hey, your flag, we're hanging your flag up here, don't you feel welcomed? But doing something that allows them to feel rooted in the community and to feel like they belong and that they matter exactly as they are, no matter what. So radical hospitality to me means beyond ordinary acts of welcome. And to me, very literally, that means sharing your resources, like a very basic, you have resources, sharing your resources.
It's very interesting. I wanted to comment on that because when I read your book in Bulgarian culture, I'm Bulgarian, there's a cultural norm where even if you have, and the expression is literally a slice of bread, and if somebody comes into your home, you have to share it. And so the way I read your book, with especially that particular term, was that even if you have very little, you have to share it with anybody who has entered your space, your home, your community. And so that really appealed to me in terms of the way you phrased it.
That's so interesting because we have a similar sort of in our folklore. I'm by origin also Bedouin, and in Bedouin culture, there's like a lot of tribal wars and things like that. But if anybody comes to you asking for sanctuary, even if they're like from an enemy tribe, you are supposed to give them 3 days of sanctuary, no questions asked. Then after that, like all bets are off. But 3 days, they get sanctuary. But the other stories that's very, very popular in Arab culture is the story of Hatim al-Ta'i, who was so poor. But when strangers came to his door and said they were hungry, he slaughtered his horse. Like all he had was his horse and fed them. And so the idea that like even the thing that you depend on, that you give up in that moment of being asked for help or support.
Thank you. I was wondering what action and work you recommend we do within the current political climate, like as opposed to wallowing in despair.
Yes, right. I know there is a time when, you sort of have to have those feelings, right? Because it can be very hard and very challenging. I'm going to use another term, which is radical hope. So I'm fond of the radical, and radical hospitality, radical accountability, radical hope. And I tell people, as a Palestinian, I grew up on the idea that, one day we will return to Palestine, right? So the idea of liberation is something that you work for. And to me, the spirit of America, let me sort of backtrack a little bit. The way I think about Palestine is the same way I think about America, is the same way I think about Guilford. It's almost the way people think about faith, I think. That no matter the actors, no matter who's in charge, the faith is the faith, right? Like it is, Guilford to me is an amazing place, regardless of who the president of Guilford is, regardless of like the financial mismanagement that might be happening, whatever is going on. Guilford as an essence is a place that I believe, in its spirit. It's kind of like America to me. I believe in the spirit of America, in the welcoming spirit of America, regardless of who's in the White House right now. And it's the same for Palestine. Like I believe that, liberation will happen. But the other thing that I believe is that I might not see the fruits of my labor in my generation, and that's okay. Because I understand things intergenerationally. My ancestors worked so that I can see something, and I work so that my children and their children can see something. So what I tell people is this idea of radical hope, that we will not be oppressed forever. Of course not. And when we work for the future, for our kids, for their kids. This is like, I've been saying this all for the last 2 weeks, so I'm going to say it again. Presidents come and go, executive orders come and go. Higher education institutions have been around, like a university has stood for decades, if not centuries. Guilford College is over 150 years old. And so there's so much infrastructure and so much stability that you are surrounded by, that you can continue to feed into and build, because this is a structure that will last. So I guess what I say to those folks is, just have that radical hope that what you're doing is going to benefit the generations after you, right? And that it's okay if you don't see the fruits of that labor. I think we're also stuck in that kind of, but I want change to happen now. I want to see it now. And I think there are certain cultures and certain people who are just used to the idea that, you know what, it's not going to happen in my generation, and I'm okay with that.
So this will be a bit of a different direction, but I'm on a campus that is non-traditional, commuter. We don't have dorms. We don't have a cafeteria.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in what we can do to help
Yeah.
support refugees in the community.
Yeah, so I think so just because you don't have dorms or you don't have a cafeteria doesn't mean that you don't have resources. I'm sure there are so many resources. You yourself are an incredible resource, right? And I'm sure you have spaces on campus that are incredibly useful. There might be ESL services or maybe counseling or career services. I always recommend that an institution reach out to its local resettlement agency or support organizations and say, hey, what do you need? Because the needs will be different depending on the community and depending on just, again, it's a very hyper-local issue. So reaching out and saying, we'd like to support, what are the needs that you're seeing right now? Because I can tell you that refugee resettlement agencies right now are struggling. Their funding has been cut. They've laid off 90% of their staff. Refugees who got here 3 weeks ago, the services that they're supposed to receive for 90 days, those are likely, they're not going to get those. So how can we step in to support, even if it's just, volunteering or helping somebody learn the bus system or helping somebody figure out how to get their library card or to sign up and get their GED, and asking your resettlement agency. But I will say that one of our first ECAR chapters was a community college in Pennsylvania called Northampton Community College. They didn't have dorms either. It was a group of faculty who got together, raised some funds, and rented an apartment near campus and sponsored a family. So, if you get students involved, this is really great for students. And I'd love to talk about how students have been engaged. If you want me to do that
Yeah,
now or?
Considering we have a number
Students,
of
yeah.
students, it would be great to hear some of the
Sure.
models about the ECAR chapters of how they've made the work sustainable.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to know is that to be able to make something like Every Campus a Refuge work, you have to tie it as, I think, deeply as possible to the curriculum and the co-curriculum, right? It has to be connected to a department, to a program, to a major, to a minor. One of the things that I said earlier was that when we first started Every Campus a Refuge, it was about supporting newcomers. And then I realized very quickly, as I was watching all these students who at the time were just hungry to help. I mean, I couldn't keep them back. There were students who were, this is 2015, they were watching what was happening and they're like, what can I do? What can I do? That's the question, what can I do? And I think that question about despair, when right now everything's like, and it's so easy to say, I can do nothing. And you can say, actually, I really need you to go to that person's house and help them fill out this form because it's really hard. That form is really hard to fill out. I can't, I'm fluent in English and I find Medicaid stuff to be unfathomable. So there is that one thing you can do, right? I'm going to give you this one task. And so our students were like, what can I do? What can I do? And I'm like, okay, well, we can do fundraisers. I need you to visit our local daycare center and see if they can give us a spot for free for like a child. I need you to figure out how to get glasses. We had someone we were hosting on our campus who lost their glasses, and apparently it's not easy on Medicaid to get your glasses replaced. So we were giving students very clear, specific tasks. And what I was figuring out very quickly was that the students were learning a lot. I said earlier at the talk, I'm an English professor, so like place-based experiential learning, like we show up and we read a poem and we talk about it. That's fun for me. But place-based experiential learning, and people were like, that's what you're doing, Diya. This is place-based experiential learning. Students are learning about Greensboro, very specifically about Greensboro, what it's like to be a newcomer in Greensboro. What are the gaps? What are the opportunities, right? What's happening systemically and locally? And so my students were learning about a global issue at a very local level. And we're like, you know what? This needs to be formalized. We need to make this institutional. And so we created a minor called Forced Migration and Resettlement Studies, where students at Guilford College get credit for hosting refugees on Guilford's campus and supporting them in their resettlement. Now, the other campuses that participate, there's about 20 of them, they do it in many different ways. Some campuses do it as a certificate. Some campuses do it as a fellowship. So if you have like a Center for Community Engagement that does fellowships, some students do it as part of their fellowship. Some students do it as part of their Bonner hours. I don't know if you have Bonner programs in Maine. Bonner is like a direct service program. It's not national. AmeriCorps, you know, some campuses do it as part of their graduate assistantships. So graduate assistants in public health, community health, nursing, education, who have to work with international populations. This is built in, right? They get a stipend and they're the ones who coordinate the family stay, they recruit volunteers, they train volunteers. And then the other thing that we noticed was that our students were gaining a lot of skills in intercultural communications, cultural humility. It was very much an international experience at home. Study abroad in your own backyard, right? Because we want our students to engage in sort of this international experience, but let's face it, Guilford College students, some of them are undocumented, some of them have families and jobs, and some of them very plainly, I mean, can't afford study abroad. So when we're saying, oh, study abroad is so awesome, it's so important, you know, global experience, international immersion, we have to make that accessible in some way to all of our students, and being able to engage and participate in the international communities that are right here, right? I mean, they're American communities, but we are so diverse. Greensboro, there's over 150 languages that are spoken in Greensboro, with incredibly diverse international communities that have now become part of the fabric of our city. And so this was really a great way to get students to sort of access those goals of international study abroad experience at home. Other campuses do this as part of a course. So it's attached to a course as a teacher in poli-sci or in international studies or in education or in language or whatever. Her students for that semester or his students for that semester, they have to do X number of hours and work with a family. And many of them engage in really exciting projects that support refugee resettlement and integration, and then allow the students to discern what they want to do after they graduate. One of the impact studies that we did was on student experiences who participated in this program. And we found, not surprisingly, that students who participate in programs like this, first of all, get experiences like independent studies, internships, things like that in refugee and immigration issues that allow them to discern a career that leads them towards refugee and immigration issues, whether it's law or resettlement support. That students learn about local issues global issues in a very local way. And I think very importantly for us in higher education, that students have a sense of the role of higher education in the world, like our role in social transformation. It's not just a place where you come and get a degree. We're bigger than that. We're more than that. We are a huge part of our communities. And I think students were able to see that as they saw the borders between their campus and the city kind of erode and become one. So yeah, those are some of the
Well, it
models.
sounds like in those spaces, there's a lot of opportunity for co-creation and also learning alongside our students, because Erin, Kate, and I often talk about how much we've learned is just partnering with Melissa and other community partners in trying to overhaul the Intensive English Institute to be welcoming to our community of immigrants in the area, which included redesigning our admissions process, redesigning our curriculum, redesigning how our classes are structured, the modality where we teach. The program is really different than it was 2 years ago, but it really comes down to the mission of the university around serving the needs of the state in our local community. And so we learned a lot.
Right. Orlina has been an amazing driving force for us. And, you know, we have had meetings about having an e-card chapter on our campus.
Get the microphone so the Zoom people can hear you. Thank you.
We have had, you know, gotten people together. There's definitely interest, but we haven't found the exact right spark
Yeah,
to move forward. But I mean, I do believe it's here.
yeah.
I do believe it's here. We just need to kind of hit that. And you know, we had an e-card training that you hosted for us, which was great to raise awareness. I think part of the problem is maybe there's a little difference working at a private institution compared to a public institution. And I'm going to say it, I question the buy-in we're getting from leadership, and that's been difficult.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's not surprising. I will say that ECAR chapters are actually split 50-50. Some of them are private, some of them are public, and some of them are land grant, like Oklahoma State University, for example, is a land grant institution. I'm not sure if Washington State University. Clemson is is an ECAR chapter, Clemson in South Carolina. Land grant, yeah, I mean, they should, yeah, but right, because the mission is to support the community and to invest in the prosperity of the community. And that's not surprising. I think so much of the work that, faculty and staff do, like we sort of, we get it, and it just takes time to translate to the administration, who are typically quite risk averse, right? Especially in an environment like this where everything is scary. And, we're hearing from over here that DEI stuff is, under attack, and then the refugee admissions program is being suspended. And so all of this feels, scary.
Right. I think it's difficult even. I'm sorry, I'm going to say this because I know my colleagues who often work with students, volunteerism has been down since COVID. I think we've had
It's
trouble.
not picking up again? I'm curious, because we experienced the same thing, but then last year we noticed a significant uptick.
I would have to let my other colleagues answer that. And I just think people are busy, right? Students are working. There's a lot of pressure like that. I think people in departments are all being asked to do more and more and more and more and more. So I think there's will. It's just like we need to bring it together.
Yeah, and bandwidth, it can be challenging. Just remember that it's not a one-person job, right? And ideally, it would be, let's say, part of a professor's course load to just have students supporting a family. And then maybe if there was like a senior or a graduate student, and this could be their fellowship, or this could be their graduate assistantship, or I don't know what kind of mechanisms you have here for like concentrated student effort. Leveraging whatever you have built in so that this is not an add-on, right? That this is something that could be slotted in as someone's either like a course or, yeah.
Don't slaughter the horse, build a cart.
Right.
Don't slaughter the horse. You need the horse.
Other questions? Yeah. Do you want to wait for the microphones? Yeah. Well, people on Zoom cannot hear. Thank you.
Speaking on that, you were just talking about kind of incorporating that into students' programs, seniors, graduate students, stuff like that. How do you think that doing that will differentiate from students who are purely volunteers of these kinds of programs because they want to do it out of the goodness of their heart, or just because they enjoy being a volunteer for whatever reason? How do you think there's going to be a difference in these students who are like, oh, well, it's my internship, so I have to participate in this? Do you think there is a behavior difference?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm interested in hearing what others think. I have found that students who do this don't do it, even if they're doing it as an internship or as part of a course or something like that. They're signing up knowing that that's what they're doing. So they're not being forced to do it. I would say it does help a great deal in terms of accountability, because when ECAR chapters host a family, it's usually a small group of students that work with that family, because best practices in refugee resettlement is that you don't want to send 20, 30 different people. There has to be some consistency, right? So it's only one or two people who are working with the children around tutoring, or maybe one person who's helping the mom and the family, get her business off the ground or whatever it is. And so it does help in terms of accountability to have that student do it as part of a course or part of an internship or part of an independent study or a fellowship. It doesn't mean that we don't get student volunteers. We actually do get student volunteers at Guilford. But you know, in those cases, it is also very hard to rely on student volunteers because they are just volunteering. So I don't know that there are behavior differences in the sense that students feel forced to do it. Usually students are self-selecting and they choose to sign up because they want to work with eCart in this way. And students do choose to volunteer, but when they choose to volunteer, we also can't be like, well, like you missed that very important thing that you were supposed to do. So I would say just in terms of an infrastructure and sustainable, one interesting example is the Lafayette College chapter. Lafayette College, as an eCart chapter, they've been a chapter for 8 years, is entirely student club run. So it's a student club that actually runs the eCart chapter. They are the ones who host the family. They do all the work. They've even organized themselves into employment specialist and like, you know, housing specialist. That work is completely voluntary. So the students volunteer, they don't get credit for that work, but it is a student club. So they do get funding and they do get, so there's kind of that structure of a student club that keeps them invested and interested in doing the work. But that's a very good question. I would say that just anecdotally and in my experience at Guilford College, I haven't noticed that students who do this for credit seem to be less engaged than students who do it for volunteer.
Thank you. I have two questions. They're not related to one another.
Okay.
Should I ask them at the same time or? Okay. So you talked about the impact on students participating and faculty and other support, and to some degree through the curriculum, maybe on institutional impacts as well. But I'm just wondering if you can say more about the impacts you have seen on institutions participating in Every Campus a Refuge?
Yeah, so how does it affect the campus and the campus culture? We don't have studies, the last evaluation that we did, so we've done 3 evaluation studies. The first one was an evaluation of the experience of refugees that were hosted on Guilford's campus initially, so like 3 families. And then the study of the students who participated in this program at Guilford. And then our last evaluation was of 6 eCart chapters. And that evaluation was the folks who, you know, were part of the focus groups and part of the surveys and the interviews were faculty, staff, and administrators, and also community members. So we took sort of the holistic approach. I'm not the social scientist, so I didn't actually conduct the study or design the protocol. It was mixed methods. The impact from the evaluation that we have seen is that it transforms or humanizes the refugee resettlement process for people who participate in it, right? So they see themselves and they see their relationship to the community and the newcomers that is transformed, right? So whether it's faculty or staff or students, they understand and feel a deeper connection with the newest community members. In terms of impact on institutions, I only have anecdotal evidence. So we didn't do an impact study on how does this transform an entire campus. But in talking to the provost at Guilford College very recently, she said that several students have told her that like when she's talked to them or they've come to her office or whatever, she'll ask like, what brought you to Guilford College? And they'll say, Every Campus a Refuge. And so it's interesting to see that in some cases it has acted as almost a recruitment, or it's an attractive thing to students, particular kind of student who's interested in doing this kind of work. Like, oh, this campus does this. I would like to be a student at that campus. The other thing that I've noticed in talking with other eCart chapters is that the relationships on campus between different departments and different offices is strengthened. So the relationship between, you know, at Guilford, ECAR is housed in the Center of Principal Problem Solving. So the relationship between that department and facilities and admissions and whatever, because we're all coming together, there might be volunteers from different departments, there might be faculty and staff who are participating from different departments, they come together and talk about this, just like you all are. It creates bridges between offices and departments that sometimes have not even talked to each other before because there's no reason for them. This is a bridge builder. So it sort of takes away some of that siloed sense that we have on campuses. So those are the two biggest things that come to mind in what I've seen happening on campuses broadly when they engage in this work.
Thank you. My second question, I don't have it articulated very well, so bear with me, but it draws on what you said earlier about one of your goals with the book being honoring the fullness of human beings, and then your discussion of radical hospitality as also meaning rooting in the community, kind of supporting that rooting in the community. And I'm just wondering, in your experience working with people, how has that played out in a society? And maybe Greensboro is very different, but that generally is very fond of social categories. I don't know if that makes sense. So instead of like sticking with kind of the labels, or really working with labels rather than against them, and then in the presence of that, continuing the work towards humanizing and rooting together and kind of, building a new ecosystem.
And you mean by social categories that people want to see folks as refugees or as immigrants or as like not, is that what you mean?
Also, whatever might be relevant in the particular service that, so, okay, you come to me in this particular case as somebody seeking English education, and I see you primarily as an English language learner in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. So what's interesting about the work of Every Campus a Refuge is because it is very whole of campus, but it's also holistic in the sense that when you're working with a family, it's not just English language, right? There's a very concerted effort to build intercultural and intracultural connections and social networks. So when a family is being hosted by a campus, even though we don't ask the family to participate in any events where they're the speakers, and that's an important rule at Every Campus Refuge. I can talk about why later. But families that are supported by chapters are invited to participate in the campus holistically, right? Whether it's to use the library or use the gym or to come to events or to be part of the everyday activities of the campus as they like, as they feel comfortable. And so on Guilford's campus and other campuses, we notice and know that families show up to concerts, they show up to festivals, they show up to musical events. And not only that, we try as much as possible also to center the skills and what the family brings. So when Ali was hosted on our campus, for example, we asked him to for obviously paid work to do workshops on calligraphy, right? So he taught on our campus for a while. And so to have folks contribute to the life of the campus as teachers, perhaps even as interpreters, as translators, as cultural brokers. And so very rarely is our engagement with a family just like I see you for class and that's it, right? We're seeing the family biking around campus. The kids are biking around campus. The family visits the farm and gets produce from the farm if the campus has a farm. There's a lot of socializing. So one of the things in that last evaluation that, and in the oral history project that we just finished, one of the most important things that the families seem to cherish is the familial connections that they build with the students that they met during their time on campus. They think of them as their sons and their daughters. That's the thing that they remember the most, that person, Hallie or Robin or Joan showed up to my house and we had tea every Tuesday. So I think that you can't solve the problem of an entire city, right? But we do the work as much as we can to create connections and contact. Because, and you know, I said this earlier and I'll say it again. The discourse right now relies on us hating other people because we don't know those other people. It's easy to believe that somebody is your enemy when you have not met that person. And so to create as many opportunities as possible for people to connect, to build community, to share meals. The Intercultural Cafe at Russell Sage is a great example of that, where they don't do English language learning in the traditional way. They invite refugee families, host it on campus and from the community, and students come and faculty come, and they have tea and cookies and just have conversations, and they do puzzles and they do like games, and they learn English that way, and it becomes a social event. I'll tell an anecdote that I think is illustrative of this. At Guilford College, our house, like every other campus house, is maintained by our facilities department. And our facilities department, usually the folks who work there are older white guys from North Carolina who in their daily life, they're lovely people, wonderful people, incredibly kind, but in their daily life, they would have no reason to interact with refugee community members. That's not their orbit. And so in the course of their work, these folks who work at facilities have to go to the e-car house to fix the washing machine, or to, you know, something happens, there's a rat or a mouse, or, you know, like, you know, we need to figure something out. So the facilities, you know, go and take care of it. And many a facilities person has connected with the refugee families that we've been hosting precisely for that reason, right? Because they have to go to the house and fix something. So one day, someone from facilities comes to my office and sort of knocks on the door and says, "Can I come in?" Of course. And he sits down and he says, "I just wanted to let you know that I went to the e-car house yesterday." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, when I showed up and I opened the door, the little kid ran up to me and was so excited to see me. And then the dad came out and they made me have lunch with them. And, you know, and I was like, "Okay, great." And then he was quiet for like a couple of seconds and he said, "I wanted to thank you, you know, for the program." It's like, "Oh, great, thanks." And he said, "You know, they're just like us." And I was like, "That's exactly, yes, exactly. We're all the same. We're all trying to raise our families. We're all trying to make sure that, you know, our kids thrive and are successful." But it was that opportunity that allowed that contact. This program allowed him to connect with community members that, honestly, in any other situation, he would not have had a reason to connect with them. So the more opportunities we have to connect with each other as people, those categories erode, right? Because then you can't put somebody in a box, right? It's Marwa, it's Ali, it's Blaze, right? I know those people, and you can't tell me that they're terrorists because I know they're not, right? And so I hate to talk about it as, you know, humanizing people, because people are human. We don't need to humanize them, but we do need to humanize the refugee resettlement process, which has been demonized. The refugee resettlement process has been demonized. And I think this helps us humanize the refugee resettlement process and allow for opportunities to people to connect with each other when they would not have had the opportunity to connect with each other.
Can I just interject here? Would you share a few of the resources you have on the e-car website for faculty or
Sure.
staff who may want to use them as learning tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you visit our website, we've just sort of revamped it to make it very easy to, if you want to become an e-car chapter, there are certain resources that are, all of our resources are free, open access, including our training. And e-car actually offers funding to institutions that want to become e-car chapters. So we really want to make it as easy as possible. So on our website, you will find our impact studies that are published. They're on there. You'll find our best practices, the manual for creating a welcoming campus, the program coordinator handbook. So let's say you have a graduate assistant coordinate this work. That program coordinator handbook is like an A to Z. How do you host a family on campus from before arrival to post arrival? We have the trainings that you can sign up for, also free. And most recently, we finished an oral history project from which we were able to develop tip sheets. So tip sheets these are tips from refugees to campuses. Here are some of the things that they are telling us they would like to see when they're being supported by a campus. Tip sheets from refugees to other refugees. So those are some of the resources that you can find, and also the oral histories, the stories of the various individuals who have been hosted by 10 campuses across this country and their stories of resettlement by that campus.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a question.
I'm just wondering what part of the resettlement process you found most difficult to facilitate for folks. I mean, I know as of last year, the process was that, you had to have a job or be enrolled in classes within 90 days or you lose your access to some of those social services programs that help a lot of refugees become integrated. So I'm just wondering if you found it most difficult to, help them overcome underemployment and obtain recertification, or English language training, or housing, or any kind of that sort of thing. Like, what are the main sticking points, so to speak, that ECAR has been able to help with?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So I want to preface this by saying that resettlement agencies are doing their best. USRAP, the Refugee Admissions Program that was designed in 1980, hasn't really changed much. So since 1980, the expectation is that refugees become self-sufficient, which means financially independent at 90 days. And when I say this, students say to me, my parents don't expect me to be self-sufficient 90 days after I graduate. So imagine arriving to a new country with not much financial, if any, financial reserve, a trauma history, maybe English proficiency is still something that you're working on. So the expectation to be financially independent in 90 days typically means that people have to accept the first job that they're offered. And it typically means that anybody in the family of working age has to work, including the 18-year-olds. And that's hard. That's hard because most times, those 18-year-olds, they want to go to school. They want to study. They don't want to work. But it's hard. It's like, okay, well, we have to pay the rent. Refugees receive $1,275 one-time stipend. So it's not much money. And then when refugees first arrive, they are residents, absolutely. However, they still don't have a social security number and they still don't have credit history. So landlords are not going to rent to people with no pay stubs, no credit history, and no social security numbers. So finding that initial housing has usually taken resettlement agencies a lot of time to sort of develop partnerships with landlords who are willing, and there are some wonderful landlords who are willing to do that, and many other landlords who are not willing to do that. And so initial housing is an issue, underemployment is an issue, but honestly, just time to breathe, time to settle, time to get recertified, time to learn English. 3 months is not enough time to do that.
I want to invite Melissa, who's our refugee resettlement coordinator in the area. Do you want to offer any comments in terms of our local context, what you have found to be challenging? Thank you. Not
Yeah,
to put you on the
absolutely.
spot or anything, but-
No worries. Hi, everyone. My name's Melissa. I'm the assistant director with Catholic Charities of Maine, which is the local resettlement agency here in Bangor. Definitely the housing thing, of course, is a huge barrier in this area and across the state. Finding creative housing solutions is something that we're always working for that might not be, your standard apartment, maybe shared living situations for single individuals, things like that. Another important thing you're talking about is the employment, especially for, we've had a lot of 18-year-olds recently and trying to find ways for them to pursue different education, certification courses, training courses, things like that is always a challenge when there is maybe only one other working adult that might be taking care of children. So looking for employment opportunities is, I think, sometimes a big barrier in this area. Some English needs, like if someone's not fluent in English, that might be a barrier for some employers in this area to be willing to kind of work with folks that are still working on their English, as that's obviously a process, and you can't learn a language within like a week. Yeah, I think just in general, raising awareness about the refugee resettlement program is a huge task, and that comes with everyone in the community kind of talking about it and having good information to spread about the resettlement agencies. So those are some, I guess, trends noticed in this area.
And even though refugee resettlement is currently suspended, Melissa still needs a lot of community support to make sure that the families who are already in our area are thriving.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have folks, I think since our site opened, we have folks that have arrived since 2023, probably have about 160 people. And that, of course, includes those first 90 days when you're trying to provide those essential services, but also what happens after. Okay, they take the first job that they have to pay their bills. Well, how do they move up and get maybe higher up in their company or find another job, start their business? So there's different kind of layers of that resettlement where it might be the initial services, but also how folks can grow in the community even more so.
And I think one of the things that I've learned through our work and partnering with Melissa and learning from you, Diya, is that when we think of universities and colleges, we're not only places for learning and for community events, but also we're employers. And so also being able to combine presence on a campus with English learning or other learning, if people are looking at certificates or degrees, but also really thinking of career readiness, career preparation, cultural orientation to being employed in a US environment. Those things all go together and they can be intertwined in certain ways. So thank you. And I think we have time for probably one more question.
My question is about transitions and how you facilitate transitions, both for families. I assume there's an end to the relationship on campus, and then also transitions for students. They're like in and out of the program.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I love the way that you phrased that. There's an end for their time on campus, but not an end to the relationship, right? So typically, a family is on our campus for several months. The students support the family in researching off-campus housing that they can afford. By the time that the family has been on our campus 6 or 7 months, someone in the family is working. We've actually sort of tracked, at least at Guilford College, every family that we've ever hosted has moved to an apartment or a house that would not have been possible for them to have been living in when they first arrived. So we do research. It's very important for us to support with that research because there are some unethical landlords out there, and we've learned that the hard way in Greensboro. I don't know if that's the case here, but people take advantage, landlords can take advantage, and sometimes apartment complexes are not up to code. And so we do our due diligence, like we investigate and research landlords and make sure that we are recommending locations. But honestly, we let the family guide the search process in terms of locations. And by that point, and you can probably attest to this, families very quickly like figure things out, right? Like, okay, I want to live here. This is a good school district. They talk to others. So typically families will say, I want to live in this area. Many of them actually say, I want to stay close to Guilford College. So we try to find places that are close to Guilford. And we have a good network of board members and alums and donors who actually own property and have rented out to refugees that we've hosted. So try to tap into that population as well, like your alums, your board members, your donors, like your tentacles are wide. As a campus, you have a lot of communities that you're connected to. And so we support with the research. We help folks. ECAR pays at Guilford College, but other chapters might do it differently. That's not a requirement, but we do it at Guilford College. We pay the first month's rent, the security deposit, and the utilities setup. And then we support the family move off campus. You've never seen an efficient move until you've asked the women's soccer team to come help you with a move. So, no, seriously, it's like, it's done in 30 minutes. 15 women walk in, everything's out on the truck, you're done. So we leverage our sports teams whenever we want to move. And we typically have a lot of volunteers from the community with trucks. And then we support the family with the move, and our program coordinator, whether it's the student or whoever, stays in touch. And we've stayed in touch with families that have moved off campus years ago. I think a testament to how well families feel loved by campuses is this most recent example of Washington State University. So Washington State University is in Pullman, and they don't have refugee resettlement in Pullman until they hosted their first Afghan family at Washington State University, and then they hosted their second Afghan family, and then they hosted their third Afghan family. And then the fourth Afghan family actually requested to be hosted by Washington State University by name. Like that's how much they heard that it was such a good place to be, like in Pullman, out of the middle of nowhere in Washington State. But clearly they're doing a great job making people feel like they belong and they're included. In terms of the transitions for students, so students can, part of their, if they start as first-year students, they can participate in the program, maybe not for credit, but certainly as volunteers. Or if they're in the Bonner program at Guilford, then for service hours throughout their years there. And then once they move off campus and they graduate, a lot of students just stay in touch just as people, friends on WhatsApp, just stay connected.
Diya, I want to thank you for spending time with us, and we had a wonderful 2-hour drive from Portland. I went to pick up Diya today from her last event at USM, and so it was really wonderful to get to know you as a person as well. And we shared a lot of immigrant mom stories on the drive up.
Teenage kids, man. Yeah.
My last question for you to kind of wrap up the conversation is you talked a lot about soul, leaving your soul behind when immigrants leave. And that really resonated with me because even though I'm a voluntary immigrant and I can go home when I want to and I'm in touch with my family, I could feel it to the core of my being, what you were describing. Could you share with us what's your dream for the future and what would feed your soul to kind of leave us with a ray of hope?
Yes. I just want to remind people that, that's so interesting because it is sort of our right, and what's so beautiful about this right of us to be very critical, right, of this country. But I want to tell you that I do a lot of this. I travel quite a bit and I talk to a lot of campuses. And every time I travel, every community I meet is full of love and kindness and generosity and hospitality. So I want you to trust and believe in that version of America, because that's the America that I see all the time. All the time, that's the America that I see. In every city, every town that I visit, people want to welcome, they want to be hospitable, they want to support, they are just incredibly kind and generous. And so that's the America, that's when I say faith, that's the faith that I have in this country. The hope is that every campus becomes a refuge. That's the goal. And that I believe that, again, radical hope, that this despair that we're feeling, once it settles, I think it'll mobilize us to act, to speak up for the promise of America and our belief in the welcoming spirit of this country. And that I know that what I'm doing is building the capacity for a future when our country will open its doors again. And I know that it will.
Thank you so much. Thank you.